mentioned, I work for an organization called Liberty in North Korea, and I'll be explaining a little bit about what our organization does through this talk, because it's quite intricately linked with the topic of North Korean refugees and so on. And we're working on the issue of North Korea in a few different ways, but one of the main ways that we've been working on North Korea has been working directly with North Korean refugees. So I'll be talking about that more today. People have very different experiences when they come to South Korea, but when we think about challenges, maybe these would be some of the main categories of challenges that North Koreans face when they come here. Actually, just to say overall, one of the best ways that I think I've heard North Korean refugees describe this experience of coming to South Korea and kind of starting their life in South Korean society is that it's a little bit like coming out of a time machine into the future. North Korea, in a lot of ways, is a version of Korean society that has not changed so much over the past decades, whereas South Korea has changed an incredible amount since the 1950s or since the 1960s. So in a way, it's really South Korea that has changed and North Korea hasn't changed as much. And even if you've been watching South Korean dramas and films when you were in North Korea, maybe for myself, it would be like watching sci-fi films and then actually going into the future. Sci-fi films may give you some hints, but it doesn't actually really prepare you for living in the future in a real way. You just have to kind of learn that when you get there. And so to go through some of what these challenges mean. So in education, I'm doing this work for more than 10 years now. I have a lot of friends from North Korea living in South Korea, and a lot of them will say that they wish that when they were in North Korea and they had to spend so much time and there was so much emphasis learning the political history of Kim Il-sung's family, right? So it's like the most important subject in North Korean schools is Kim Il-sung revolutionary history #1, and then it's Kim Il-sung revolutionary history #2, and then it would be other subjects. Of course, people are also learning maths and science and so on, but biggest emphasis is on the kind of political history and the ideology and so on. And then for the vast majority of people, they bring that education in South Korea and it's not useful. And they come to South Korea and they realize that actually, if they were able to learn English during that time, then they would be in a much better position here in South Korea, because English is very highly prized in South Korea. It's related to, educational success, even professional success for a lot of people. And so that's something that people face. That's an example of kind of an educational challenge that people face. On the skills side, people have developed all sorts of skills in North Korea. Some of them, a lot of them would be useful in South Korea, but in terms of professional skills, there may be a difference because, obviously in a lot of areas, South Korea is more advanced. And so one example of this, or one illustration of this, is there's actually quite a lot of North Korean refugees who worked as doctors in North Korea. And when they come to South Korea, they can't just get a job as a doctor in a South Korean hospital. And to be honest, it's not even necessarily just like prejudice and discrimination, because actually there is a difference. There's of course a lot of cultural difference. I kind of mentioned that in the, it's almost like coming out of a time difference. Time machine. So there are quite a few cultural differences that have merged between North and South Korea since division. Psychological side, this varies so much from person to person, but maybe especially in the cases where North Koreans leave North Korea and are leaving family members behind, and they may be the only person that's come from that family, and then they come to South Korea, then sometimes people do, face some psychological challenges with that. I've seen a lot of people be able to recover a lot of that when they've been able to reestablish contact with their family members, learn that they're okay, be able to speak with them, sometimes even be able to, send help, send, resources back home, and that can help the psychological side. Actually talking about that in a couple of slides, that phenomenon of people getting in contact with people back in their hometowns. Social identity, these kinds of challenges. This is on the South Korean side. Most South Korean people will never have met a North Korean person, will never have met a North Korean refugee. And so if you are a North Korean person living now in South Korea, then that can be a kind of burden. There sometimes can be prejudice or discrimination. that people face. And so there are these kinds of social challenges, even if it's not just, negative prejudice and discrimination, just kind of having the label of being a North Korean refugee or a North Korean defector in South Korea can be kind of a burdensome label to always have to, explain yourself and answer questions about, how you escaped or your life in North Korea and these kind of things. And so a lot of people actually end up changing their accent, changing the way they speak. Because for most people, you wouldn't be able to tell that they were from North Korea, but just they have a different accent. And a lot of people will actually make a conscious effort to try and change their accent just so they sound like a South Korean person, so that people aren't asking where they're from, and they don't have to deal with that kind of baggage. That points to some of the kind of social challenges that people can't just be kind of living comfortably with their true background and their identity in South Korea, and then there's identity challenges that come along with that as well. The last point here, paradox of choice. This is a concept from psychology, but some North Korean friends have described the challenge of starting their lives in South Korea in terms of having too much freedom to handle all at once. And I think that the way that I understand this is this kind of paradox of choice, where actually having too many things to choose from can actually be a little bit overwhelming. If you've been living a very constrained life, where you're just not actually making that many choices, you can't just like travel to a different part of the country, let alone another country, or you're not choosing, what to study, so like all the different kinds of choices that we make, even without thinking about it, maybe in our modern lives. For North Koreans starting new lives in South Korea, then having to, make all of these choices without having a lot of preset kind of defaults from living here for a long time, then that can be a challenge, kind of an interesting challenge that North Koreans face when they start their lives in South Korea as well. Moving on, so the last part of this session, my slides, I'll be talking about the positive roles that North Korean refugees play in this issue. And the first thing is we have to go back to the kind of narrative, the image of North Korea. So, in South Korea as well as around the world, when the news media is talking about North Korea, it's often focused on the politics, the security aspects. Is quite narrow. And so North Korean refugees play this very important role through the media, through events where they're going and talking, through public lectures, through even, going to the United Nations and these kind of forums as well, in showing a broader image and telling a wider and more rich narrative of North Korea, right? So much of what we know about North Korea, and I think a lot of the most interesting things that we've learned from North Korean people who've escaped the country and are now able to share that kind of information or their stories, their perspectives with us. And so that can be through, just meeting in person. It could be through academic interviews and research. It could be through these kinds of, television programs. There's all sorts of ways that North Korean refugees who resettled in South Korea and also, around the world are telling the world a broader kind of narrative, image of their homeland. And I think that this is very important. Also, of course, this is, increasingly through social media as well. There's been over the last 10 years or so a big increase in the number of North Koreans, especially young North Koreans, who have resettled in countries around the world and then have started their own YouTube channels or have become Instagram influencers and are using that to, just create their own media and tell their own stories directly, not through the filter of, South Korean television programs and those kind of things. So I think this is very interesting, a very positive development that can bring more attention to the people of North Korea. This is, of course, where we learn more about North Korean human rights situations, but not just that, right? Also, just the reality of daily life in North Korea, how the economy works, what the culture is like, how society works, and also some of the positive changes that are happening inside North Korea as well. So lastly, in terms of this, North Korean refugees are advocating for their people, for change in their homeland, at the highest levels of the United Nations and international politics. And so we see here Il Kim on the right, Kim Kim on the left. They're not related, but they were both actually, and then Ju Il-young on the bottom left there in the Oval Office back when, in Trump's first term. So these are all friends of mine as well. They were all program participants in our programs, went to the United States with our programs, and then had the chances to go back to America and speak at the United Nations Security Council, or advocate directly in the White House for their issues. So I think that this is very important as well. North Korea is often discussed at the United Nations, but it's often just diplomats of various countries talking about North Korea. But we should be including North Korean voices and perspectives in that, and North Korean voices, North Korean people's views should not just be heard, but they should be reflected in our policies towards North Korea. And so this is also a very important role that North Korean refugees and North Korean defectors who've resettled in other countries are able to play. The second part of how North Korean refugees are playing an important role, and the last part of this this lecture, is about how North Korean refugees are changing their homeland. So I kind of mentioned this very briefly, but surprisingly, maybe, many North Korean refugees are able to reestablish contact with their families back home, and they're then serving as a channel for money, resources, and information going back into their homelands. And so this is a little bit, what that can look like or how that's possible. So this again is a photograph on the left-hand side. I took both of these photos on the border between North Korea and China. And on the left-hand side, you see the Chinese border fence, and you see a Chinese mobile phone mast tower, which they couldn't have made it any closer to North Korea. And so Chinese mobile phone signal, the network signal, is going into North Korea, which means that if Chinese phones are smuggled into North Korea, Chinese smartphones are going in, then if you're close enough to the border, then you can be picking up the Chinese network and having direct contact with the outside world. So this is how North Korean refugees, even after they resettle in South Korea, are able to use this kind of network to be in direct contact with their family members in North Korea. It's of course very dangerous in North Korea to be doing this. The punishment, if you're caught, is very severe, but people are using these kind of phones. They're going up the mountain to, kind of be a little bit safer and also give themselves a better chance of getting some signal from the Chinese side. There nowadays, it would all be Chinese smartphones that are smuggled in. And so people are using WeChat, which is, if people aren't familiar with WeChat, it's like a more powerful, more diverse version of Kakao or WhatsApp or something like that. And so through that, people are sending photographs even. It may be a photograph of a handwritten letter. It may be a voicemail. It may be, even photographs and videos, both from South Korea to family members in North Korea and from family members in North Korea to South Korea as well. And with this contact, people are also working with, smugglers or brokers to send money to their families as well. I know a lot of North Koreans who have resettled in South Korea and then, for instance, in their first year of life in South Korea, have been able to send 5 million won, which is, what's that, a little bit less than $4,000 these days. That's just in their first year of living in South Korea. I know people that have sent more than that. A lot of people on an annual basis, if they are in contact, if they're able to send money back to their families in North Korea, they'll be sending around 3 million won. Family members receiving this money may be able to also use some of it to pay bribes to the authorities, because there may be a question mark, there may be some kind of investigation. If somebody's escaped from there's one family member that has escaped and is therefore missing, then there may be an investigation, there may be questions, there should be, for instance, 5 people living in this house. Why is there only 4 people now? And so people may pay bribes to kind of protect their family from that kind of harassment or investigation. And one way that you could just solve it completely, and they're in contact and they're sending money back home, and therefore supporting their family. Not just that, not just are they supporting their family, that is a really significant amount of money for a lot of North Korean families. And so they're often investing it into some kind of market activity, some kind of, entrepreneurialism, business activity that they're involved in. Not only that, but we also learn from North Korean refugees that some of the remittance receiving families in North Korea become micro lenders in their own communities. When we look around the world at development in poor countries, a lot of researchers will point out the importance of remittances from from migrants who have gone from those poor countries to richer countries, the importance of those remittances, and then also the importance of models of micro lending in those kinds of communities so that people can, develop their own business and kind of build up their local economy from the ground up. And this role is exactly what North Korean refugees are actually playing. North Korean refugees, when they resettle in South Korea, if they're able to be in contact with family members, the more successful they are in South Korea, the more they can play this role, the more, the more financially stable they are in South Korea, the more they're going to be able to send money back to their families in North Korea. And so that's helping people's lives to improve inside North Korea. It's also accelerating positive economic change through marketization, increasing the agency of North Korean people, increasing their capability is separate from North Korean government control. And then it's also changing the information environment in North Korea as well.